The ninth and final class of Azon Overhaul is all about maintenance of your website. This is essentially everything that you are going to be doing after you're done with your overhaul work. With that said, before you actually try to carry out any of the work that I teach in this particular class, I highly recommend that you wait at least 1 month after your overhaul work is completely finished before you actually dive into this particular class. The reason for that is simply because a large part of the goal of Azon Overhaul is to get you to start getting search engine traffic and or to improve your search rankings. And unfortunately, it simply takes Google some time to not only index the changes that you have made to your site, but to also reflect those changes in the live rankings. And so if you complete your work and then the next day or even a week later, you go out and try to look through Google or try to look through Amazon to see if there are any differences, you may not immediately be able to spot them. And this might give you the initial impression that your overhaul work may not have been successful and you might already be tempted to start trying to change things. This can unfortunately result in a never-ending loop of doing stuff to your site, not really seeing anything happen because of it automatically, and then going and making more changes and just rinsing and repeating that entire process forever. So by waiting at least a month after you've finished your overhaul work, you're giving Google the time to reflect rankings based on the changes that you have made. Now, that 1 month time period, I give that as a minimum because even after a month, you may still not get a 100% accurate picture of how your overhaul work is actually done. Again, the reason for this is simply the way that Google works with updating their search rankings. And a large part of this can actually depend on what kind of changes you have made to your website. I'll get into talking about this in a little more detail later in tonight's class, though. So if you wait a month and you're still not seeing anything happening, don't get discouraged quite yet. Give it a little more time, maybe wait another month or two after that, and simply check your results again. Ultimately, I recommend giving a full 6 months after your overhaul work is finished to get what I consider to be more of a realistic view of how Google is viewing your website at this point. This gives it plenty of time to update everything and to also continue making multiple passes through the rankings, something, again, I'll be talking about a little later in tonight's class. So now, compared with earlier lessons in this series, where I was teaching you guys how to go through Google and how to go through Amazon to do some research to try to figure out how your site was currently doing before you made your overhaul plans, you're essentially going to end up doing the same type of stuff after your website is done, again, to get some updates on all of those stats. That way you can compare your numbers now to your numbers from before your overhaul work. So you're going to be revisiting both Google and Amazon during this particular class to get a fresh view of all of the stats for your website. And again, you'll be able to use this to judge whether your overhaul work was successful or not. This can also lead you to long-term maintenance though. When you find that perhaps the results are not quite as good as you wanted them to, or maybe some pages have performed really well and others have not, you maybe need to go back in and do a little bit of fine-tuning to get your website to perform exactly how you want it to. Even beyond that though, there's the simple fact that pretty much all niches and industries will change over time. I honestly can't really think of one that remains completely static. There's always some kind of new innovation coming out in pretty much any industry. At least if you wait long enough, a couple of years or so, you end up always having some changes within the niche, within the products that are popular in that type of industry. You have products that get discontinued and replaced. You have new inventions that come along. You have new information that the public becomes aware of, which can end up changing buying habits and things of that nature. So ultimately, no matter how great of a website you have, today's lesson can still be really helpful to you in the future, because this will allow you to keep track of your website, to monitor how it is doing, and to identify when and if that point in time comes where you might need to make another overhaul to your website, even if we're talking a number of years down the road. Because I can pretty much guarantee that at some point within the life of your Amazon affiliate sites that you'll end up having to make some changes to it to keep it fresh, to keep it as profitable as you can possibly make it. So today's class is not just about making sure your overhaul work was successful, but this is also about essentially your entire future with this particular Amazon site, and any of your Amazon sites for that matter. So what we're going to be talking about today is first a little bit of a general overview of your overhaul follow-up, and then we're going to be diving into talking about search engine monitoring. So this will be everything having to do with Google, and then Amazon monitoring, and finally a little bit of information about ongoing maintenance and updates that you might want to make to your site based on the information that you get from all of this monitoring research. So to begin with, I want to talk about the overhaul follow-up. Once you finish your overhaul work from the previous classes to where your entire public website is finished in terms of the plans that you made for it, as I said before, you want to wait at least 1 month after you're completing your work, but you may need to wait as long as 6 months possibly to get a completely accurate view of Google and how they actually view your website. Again, this waiting period is necessary because of how Google works. And most likely other search engines would work this way too. However, I do focus all of my strategies on Google. Usually I find that if I am making my site to work in the Google rankings, then the other lesser search engines will end up giving me some rankings as well. So with that said, Google can certainly index your overhaul changes within just a couple of days, maybe even a week or so. However, you're not necessarily going to see your search rankings instantly reflect those changes, at least in most cases. Google's search algorithm updates your search rankings in multiple passes. So when you make improvements to your site, those changes are essentially reflected a little bit at a time until they're completely in effect. Ultimately, though, the way the Google algorithm works, you never really get changes completely in effect. You're always missing a tiny, tiny little piece of it, which it will continue to add to your rankings in those future updates. So with that said, some of the aspects of your overhaul work can take longer to reflect in the search rankings than others. Simple content changes are among the fastest changes that you are actually going to see reflected in the search rankings. So if you're just going into existing pages of your website and editing some of the text content that is there, and or maybe adding some new text content to those pages, a good chunk of those updates will be reflected in search rankings fairly quickly. However, pretty much anything else that you do to your site, the addition of new pages, changes to your funnel links, changes to your menu system, and even structural changes that you make to your site are going to be something that takes simply more time to see reflected in the search rankings. With each pass of the Google algorithm, you'll get a little bit of a boost from all those different factors. So with that said, just simply depending on what you have done to your website during your overhaul, you may be able to see results quickly, or it may take longer. But don't make any broad assumptions about the success of your overhaul work until you have allowed a sufficient amount of time to pass. If you don't really understand how all this works, it's entirely possible to enter that never-ending loop that I mentioned to you before, where you just overhaul your site, you don't see results, and you start overhauling yet again, and you just keep rinsing and repeating. But you need to make sure that you avoid doing this, giving your site a little bit of time to reflect those changes, and then making some educated decisions about whether or not it was successful before you decide to do anything else to your website. Now I want to talk about unsuccessful and successful websites here for just a moment and point out some of the differences here in terms of your follow-up work and what you want to be looking out for. With an unsuccessful website, if you were not getting traffic before your overhaul work, then your number one goal with this project is going to be to start seeing search rankings that are sending you some type of steady traffic. However, if you cannot get traffic to your website after an overhaul, you may be better off abandoning the website. But again, do not make this decision lightly. Do not come to it quickly. It takes time to let Google essentially realize that, hey, you might have turned your site around. If you had a lot of automated content on your site before your overhaul and you're completely redoing it and you're going to have all this high quality unique content on your site now, it may simply take Google some time to really realize that you have turned your website around, especially if you happen to have gotten one of the independent Google reviewers onto your website. They may have given your website some kind of a bad mark, and that might be why it's affected in the search rankings. And unfortunately, it just simply would take time for things like that to get fixed. Another one of those people would have to go revisit your website and realize that, hey, you have indeed made a lot of really great changes to it. And so that stuff simply doesn't happen overnight. And this is all in addition to the normal automated parts of the Google algorithm too. They have these manual aspects that are thrown into it that are powered by real people. And unfortunately, you can't really do anything about that except put the right kind of stuff on your website and wait. If you go and you revisit an unsuccessful website after a couple of months has passed from doing your overhaul work and you're still seeing zero traffic, look and see if you can identify any kind of an improvement in your search rankings. If you can, I'd highly recommend to simply just wait a little bit longer, again, upwards of 6 months or so. If you overhaul your website though, and it still has zero traffic a complete year after your overhaul work is finished, this is the point where I would seriously consider cutting your losses and closing the website down to avoid future hosting and domain fees. However though, there are ultimately two kinds of unsuccessful websites. You have the sites with steady traffic that can simply fail to convert that traffic into sales, and then you have sites that just don't have traffic at all. Ultimately though, if your site has any kind of search ranking that is bringing you Google traffic on any kind of a regular basis, even if we're just talking 100 people a month that are coming to your website, I would highly recommend to advise you to never abandon it. There's always something that can be done with a website that has traffic and Google rankings. And I guarantee you, if you let that domain slip away, somebody will snatch it up the instant it becomes available, and they'll just slap advertisements on it. A site that is missing search traffic ultimately has a problem that lies with the search engine. So unless you can completely redo your website and have the search engine reflect those changes, then you're pretty much out of luck. And ultimately, that part of it, that is what is not really within your control. You can't control what the search engine does. However, a site that has search rankings and traffic but no sales has the problem lying within the website itself. And so fixing this type of problem is completely within your control. You just simply have to figure out what the best way is to try to sell to your website traffic. And if you can't sell anything to them, no matter what you try, then ultimately you could still put some kind of advertisement on the site, something like Google Ads, where you're just earning a little bit for each click that somebody does on one of those ads. It's better than abandoning a website that has good traffic on it and you just simply can't get any Amazon sales made. There's a lot of different reasons why this kind of stuff can happen. You do have things that are kind of outside of your control in a lot of those areas yet again. Even with my Down Comforter website that has really great traffic, I can recognize that there is one obstacle that I may never be able to overcome with it. And that obstacle is the simple fact that IKEA is, I don't know, a little stingy about how they sell their products. They don't offer their products at wholesale prices to other people to be able to sell. So you don't really have vendors for IKEA products on the Amazon website like you do for a lot of other types of brands. And ultimately, no matter what IKEA comforter I end up promoting, I know that somebody could go to IKEA.com and buy that same product for a cheaper price. And so if I ultimately cannot get my IKEA page to start doing really well and converting a large chunk of that traffic into sales, I may be better off switching that page to some kind of a pay-per-click model instead of trying to actually refer sales. Chances are IKEA probably would pay me to put a little pay-per-click ad, chances are through Google, on that page of my website. And so that's just an example of sometimes situations may just never be able to be resolved, but ultimately you can always find a way to monetize traffic on a website. So never consider a site that has search rankings and gets some kind of regular traffic. Never consider it to be completely unsuccessful. You just need to figure out how to actually monetize that traffic. Now with a profitable website, if your site was already making money before you did your overhaul work, your number one goal with this overhaul project is to increase your average monthly earnings. And then you have a secondary goal of trying to increase your search rankings and your traffic. Although, in my opinion, as long as you have your website set up correctly, increasing the traffic and the search rankings will almost always help you accomplish that primary goal of increasing your earnings as well. With a profitable website, you're obviously going to want to check on your existing search rankings, your traffic, and your sales stats to see what improvements have been made there from your overhaul work. However, it's also important to make sure that this overhaul work has not somehow harmed the successful aspects of your website. You want to make sure that all of those really great search rankings that you had before are still there or better. Even if you have been able to pick up new search rankings, you still want to make sure that you don't destroy the old ones, because then you might just be trading this traffic for this traffic instead of combining those numbers together to get more traffic than you had before. So when you can find that you've made improvements to your site in these different areas, in terms of maybe you were able to boost your search rankings on a page, maybe you were able to increase your conversion rates or sell more in a particular way, whatever it is that's working for you from your overhaul work, try to take a little bit of time to figure out exactly why it is working. This can teach you major lessons that are absolutely priceless that you can apply to pretty much any website that you run. You can even use it to help to improve other pages of this particular website that you've been overhauling. You find a way that gives you really great converting advertisements, you apply that to all of your ad pages. You find a way to write your content that just seems to really hit the mark with Google, you try to repeat that with other work that you do. Looking for stuff like really great search rankings, especially when you're dealing with a high traffic, really competitive keyword, those things you should really take notice of and try to figure out how exactly you got to where you are in those rankings. Look for effective traffic funnels on your own website where you have been effectively able to take traffic from an informational page and move them along to a product page, and even maybe then able to convert that product page traffic into sales. Look for things like high click-through ratio ads, where you're getting simply a lot of the traffic that's on your website clicking through on your Amazon affiliate link. And then also look for ads that have really high conversion rates. The actual reasons that lie behind all of these great things that you might be able to find on your site, they can vary from case to case. And so it's not necessarily a straightforward, if you see this, copy this from your website. But try to look at everything as a whole and ultimately figure out what are the important parts that you have done that have led to these higher than average stats that you are seeing on an area of your website. And with that said, I want to move on to talk about search engine monitoring. This will be using Google once again to essentially figure out how your website has done from your overhaul work, and this can also be used for the long-term monitoring and maintenance of your site too. Now ultimately, anything that I taught you in class number 2 of the Azon Overhaul series, this was the Google research class. Any of those tactics can again be utilized at this portion in the series, where you're going back and trying to find that same information that you were looking for before you did your overhaul work to identify the key areas that needed improvement. Now you want to go back and look and see if you have actually been able to improve in those areas or not. So with that said, I'm not necessarily going to go into as much detail in this class as I did in class number 2 as far as showing you how to come about all of those different stats. But if you are unsure of maybe exactly how I came to get a certain stat, I would highly recommend to go and refer back to class number 2 for that. I simply did not want to essentially spend half of today's class repeating training that I had already given you earlier in this series. So with that said, first you want to go to Google Analytics. In Google Analytics, you want to look for general traffic stats for your website. Ultimately, do you see an improvement in your average daily traffic compared with traffic levels from before your overhaul work? Now, this again is yet another reason why you need to make sure you give your website sufficient time after your overhaul work before you can actually go in and start monitoring the results from it. Unfortunately, I actually just completed my overhaul work a week ago in the previous live class in this series. And so I'm simply not going to be able to show you exactly what has happened from my overhaul work on my website quite yet. However, even if I just waited another week or two, I still wouldn't really get a full picture, because you can certainly have days that are busier or not as busy as other days. And if you're looking at one day by itself, you might see really low traffic, and another day you might see really high traffic. For example, in this area of my traffic, you can see that it goes up and down on a weekly basis. It's simply because there are more people that are searching for these topics. It appears to be on the weekends. It looks like my Sunday of each week on this website seems to be the most popular. So when you're looking at just a few days worth of traffic, or even a week or two worth of traffic, you may not get the full picture. You really want to be able to see 30 days worth of traffic. And ultimately, if you just completed your overhaul work 30 days ago, then your current search rankings would be what is ultimately going to reflect the work that you have done, at least in that entire 30-day time period. If you're looking at it as a whole, you're not going to get the full picture. You might even need to wait 2 months after your overhaul work. The first month to give Google time to reflect the changes that you have made, and the second month to give you enough stats to truly be able to look back at and to compare to stats from before your overhaul work. Now ultimately, in terms of general traffic stats, you obviously want to be seeing your page views as a general number going up over time, but there are a lot of other aspects to these general traffic stats that are really important to be considering to really get a full picture of how your work is done. For example, unique users tells you how many people you're actually reaching through your website. It is possible to have a decrease in the number of unique users that you have on your site, but to still have an increase in the number of page views, just depending on how your site is done. Ultimately, though, an increase in unique users is a pretty good indication of how your site is doing over time. Because ultimately, this is how many people you're reaching. These are your potential customers that might be buying from your site. This also can be some kind of an indication as to your search rankings. Better search rankings are going to bring more new people into your site from Google, which would then increase your number of users. When you see an increase in your page views, it could be because you're getting more people on your website, but it could also be because people are looking at more content when they're on your website. Your pages per session number here relates to the number of users. So essentially, I have this many number of users, and they're viewing this many number of pages each to give me a total of this number. So if I had made changes on my website that made it easier to navigate, maybe I did some more effective traffic funneling from the informational pages to the product pages of my site. Certain things like this would certainly help to increase the average number of pages that somebody sees when they're visiting my website. And so this can be a good indication as to whether or not your changes have been well received by your website visitors. Other things like the average session duration and the bounce rate also kind of work in that same manner. You can see if people are not bouncing off of your website, or if they are spending longer on your website, then again, your changes have been well received. The more you can get people to stay on your site, the more pages you can get them to view. Ultimately, the better chance you have of referring a sale to each of your website visitors. Now, when you dive a little bit deeper into your search engine stats to see how your site is performed on a page-by-page and a keyword-by-keyword basis, you can get more of a clear picture of the actual search rankings and even changes that you have made to specific pages of your site and how those have fared in the search rankings. One last thing before I jump over to that. I mentioned that in terms of looking at my general stats, how I would obviously need to be able to wait a lot more time to truly be able to see whether my overhaul was successful or not. Back in this area is when my website first got hacked, and I had to take it down offline for a little while to fix it. Then essentially my overhaul work began and was taking place really all throughout this time period. I think I completed work right here or so. And so until I really have 2 months to look at after this point, I'm not really going to be able to know whether I've been able to improve my traffic levels over these numbers. My second little down period here was again the hacking issues. And so essentially I've kind of had to restart right here from my progress. Whatever I was doing back here, I essentially had to kind of restart again over here in terms of my waiting time. So I'm certainly going to have to wait a little while to truly be able to see how these changes have affected my search rankings and my website overall. Now for the individual page search rankings, if you go to acquisition and search engine optimization and queries, you will be able to see your individual keyword searches that have been done on your site. You want to be asking yourself a couple of questions at this point. Number one, how do your current rankings compare to your rankings on the same keywords before the overhaul compared with now? And then number two, can you identify any new keyword rankings that simply did not exist before? These are the two biggest aspects to your search rankings. You want to know if you've improved your existing rankings, and you want to know if you have picked up any new rankings. However, you do have these different stats beyond just whether or not your placement has improved. You have your average position, which would be letting you know whether or not your average search ranking has improved on that phrase. But then you can also look at whether or not you're getting more exposure, which would be your impressions. This is how many times somebody is searching on Google and your search listing shows up somewhere on the page that they are viewing. And then the clicks being the number of people that actually end up clicking your listing and going through to your website. Your click-through ratio here is essentially your clicks compared with your impressions. How many people does it take to see your search listing before one person will end up clicking on it? I find it also important to monitor my click-through ratios for search rankings. It's entirely possible with an overhaul that you could end up improving a search ranking for a particular keyword phrase, but you may end up lowering your click-through ratio. The reason why something like this can happen is because of what shows up on the Google website. For example, if I just go and I search this phrase right here on Google, I can see what Google shows me for my search result. I can see the title that it shows for my page, and I can also see the description that ends up showing up here. Now, if I see that I have improved my search ranking and yet I have lowered my click-through ratio, this is where I want to go. I want to go to Google. I want to find my actual search result that people are seeing, and I want to see what they see. Look at your content, read through it, ask yourself, is this really helping to attract people to click on my result? Or could I modify this content very, very slightly to try to change that? For example, if I didn't feel like my title was very appealing and I wanted to modify this, I could go in and simply make a quick change to the title of my page. In a lot of cases though, when you have a really good search ranking, I really don't recommend trying to make a drastic change with your title. Something like that can end up affecting your search ranking. However, the content that Google shows here, sometimes this content comes from the meta description that you set up in the SEO settings for an individual page on your site. And other times, this is just content that is pulled from the actual page on your website. If it's being pulled from the actual page on your website, what you can do is go in, find that exact section of text within the content of your page, and you can just make some minor adjustments to it. You don't want to really be wiping out a lot of the keywords that are found there. IKEA, down comforters, all of these model names here. These different aspects of this sentence here, or couple of sentences, I would want to make sure I leave intact because that's likely why Google is selecting this passage from my site to be showing. But I can change everything else in between it if I wanted to try to make my listing more appealing for somebody to click on. So don't just take everything at quick face value in terms of whether or not you've improved your average ranking and improved the amount of traffic that you receive, but also consider whether or not your listing is faring better overall. And the click-through ratio is a really quick and easy way to figure that out. Now next, in this same menu here, Acquisition, Search Engine Optimization, there's another page for landing pages that I commonly like to use. This works essentially the same way that the previous one did, except instead of grouping it by keyword phrases, I'm now grouping it by pages that are on my website. So I can see how an entire page on my website is doing in the search engine rankings on Google as a whole. So this is a combination of all of my search rankings for that IKEA page, all the different phrases that I rank for. It gives me this much exposure. I receive this many number of clicks. This is my average position, and this is my click-through ratio. So in the same way that you are using the information on a keyword by keyword basis, you can also use that information on a page by page basis too, to simply be able to see, have I improved the rankings of that page? Is it getting more or less clicks than it was getting before? All this type of information makes it very clear-cut on whether or not your overhaul work has been successful in the end. And when you do see things that have not quite improved as much as you wanted them to, just simply make note of these things. And then you can go and revisit your website and see what else can be done there. In terms of minor adjustments, you don't really want to be doing anything too drastic as long as you are seeing improvements overall. So, if I did a good job with my overhaul and traffic and search rankings have all gone up, but maybe I have lowered my click-through ratio with a couple of particular pages, I can go back into those pages. I can look at some particular keywords for them and try to figure out exactly what people are seeing on Google before they are choosing whether or not to click on my result. and then I can go back to my website, make minor content adjustments to try to fix these minor issues that might exist, just as an example. Now you can also go to Behavior, Site Content, and All Pages. This is going to give you traffic data for each page as a whole. Now this is kind of similar to what we were just viewing, except before it was only for search rankings and the traffic that was coming in to those pages of my site from those search rankings. Here though, I'm looking at all the traffic on my site as a whole, broken down on a page-by-page basis. You can not only see here general information like the number of people that have seen it, how many people are entering the page, your entrances compared with your page views can show you how many people are actually navigating through the website to get to those pages and how many people are just entering those pages immediately. Your bounce rates and your exit rates here I consider to be pretty important. If these are excessively high, then it can indicate that more may still need to be done to your website to be potentially funneling traffic along to the correct pages. The one time though that I'm not as picky with my exit rates especially is on my product pages. For example, on my IKEA page, I fully expect to have a higher exit percentage with this page compared with other pages like the home page of my site. Simply because when people are on my home page, they're more likely to be navigating to another area of my site to view more information. However, once they're on the IKEA page, the main focus there is to try to get somebody to click on an Amazon ad and to go off to the Amazon website. So once people land on my IKEA page, I'm okay with them leaving my website as long as I'm getting a decent number of those people leaving my website going to the Amazon website. So these numbers are not going to necessarily be clear-cut in terms of higher is better or higher is worse. It's going to be something that you'll have to look at each page individually and say, okay, what is going on this page on my site? What do I want people to do? And am I seeing that reflected here in the stats that are available to me? Now you also want to be looking at your traffic funnels in terms of whether or not you have been able to get people to successfully navigate from certain pages of your site to other pages of your site. I find the easiest way to do this is within behavior and behavior flow. It gives you a visual representation of how people navigate through your website. You can see what pages they enter your website on, and then you can see where they navigate to from those different areas, and also where people are leaving your website. Ultimately, you need people to be navigating through your site to your product pages. So depending on where they're entering your site, it may be more or less important for you to make sure those traffic funnels are working really good for you. On my IKEA page, for example, though, this is actually the page of my site that has the most entrance traffic. And ultimately, I'm not trying to funnel anybody from this page to any other page. I simply want people to be landing on this page and clicking on an Amazon ad and potentially to end up purchasing it. So the fact that I lose a lot of my traffic through the IKEA page is not as big of a deal. But if I was getting most of my traffic through informational pages, those traffic funnels, the links on those pages that would move people from the info pages to my product pages, would become much, much more important to ensure they were working correct. Now, if you can identify any kind of a major problem with your traffic funnel at this point, especially on those informational pages, for example, where a lot of your traffic is lost and ultimately that shouldn't be happening, it can certainly be worth revisiting those pages to do some additional overhaul work, even if it is just trying to change how you're funneling traffic, the link that you're using, the placement of that link, the wording of that link. Different aspects like that that seem pretty minor can have a big effect on whether or not people end up clicking on it and moving from one part of your page to the next. Now, I also recommend using the Google Keyword Planner. This isn't something that you'll have to do too horribly often. And in fact, you may even be coming to this keyword planner with some kind of an idea in mind that you have found elsewhere. If you're seeing new innovations or new products or some kind of new public news that has to do with the industry that you're targeting, that can be a good time to come back to the Google Keyword Planner to punch in some of those new phrases that might be associated with your niche and to see if you have search traffic showing up for them. Now, if you can identify brand new keywords in your niche, it can certainly be worth your time to go in and do a quick overhaul to your site and just add in a new page, or potentially even just add in a new section of content to one of your existing pages to try to target those new keywords that are showing up. However, one of the biggest things to remember here is that you're not going to see the traffic data showing up in the Google Keyword Planner until essentially a couple of months after it's happened, after a keyword has become popular. So if you suspect that a new keyword that you know of because of something you read in the news or something you saw on TV or new products that have been released in the industry, if you feel like there's going to be a couple of particular keywords that might be heavily searched relating to those new topics, put the content on your website before you ever even see traffic data in the keyword planner. That's actually how you get latched onto trending keyword phrases before everyone else really realizes it. When you find it in the Google Keyword Planner, ultimately everyone else is already going to be able to find it too. And while that can certainly be okay to jump on a keyword phrase a couple of months after it has gotten popular, you'll simply get better results if you just try to let your natural intuition take over and say, okay, this is likely going to be pretty popular for my niche, and so why don't I just go ahead and put this content out there and see how it works out. Now, I next want to move on to talk about Amazon. You also want to be doing Amazon monitoring, just like you were doing Google monitoring. And this also works in the same manner in terms of I've actually taught you guys a lot of this information already. Any strategies that I taught you in the Amazon research class, that was class number 3 of the Azon Overhaul series, you can also apply those strategies here with the ongoing monitoring and maintenance of how the Amazon ads on your site are performing. So with that said, if you do find yourself having questions about how to find some of these stats or how to dive deeper into individual products to try to calculate certain click-through ratios or conversion rates for them, I would highly recommend going and revisiting class number 3 for that information. But I will be teaching you here at least a general overview of some of that information, and then also my recommendations that specifically have to do with your ongoing monitoring and maintenance of the site. So the first thing is general Amazon stats. Simply going into your Amazon affiliate account and looking at the stats that are available for you there, you ultimately want to know if you have increased your revenue or not. That's the main goal of any Amazon site, is to refer sales and make commissions. And so from your overhaul work, you want to be improving that number. However, the reason why I say average monthly revenue here is because every website and every niche can be different. The time of the year that it is currently can have a drastic effect on your sales. Just as an example, my Down Comforter website is always really popular during the colder winter months of the year, and maybe even a month or so outside of that. But during the really hot months of the year, it's not completely dead in terms of traffic and sales, but it's certainly nowhere near as popular as it is during the months of, say, November and December and January. And so with that said, I have to consider that when I am looking at my stats. And this doesn't just apply to your Amazon stats either. This also applies to stuff you're looking at on Google. Since my website and my niche that I'm targeting has some of these seasonal tendencies, I need to consider that when I'm comparing information. If you're just looking at a month of data here and comparing it to a month of data from immediately before your overhaul, you may end up skewing that data if your niche has these seasonal tendencies in it. However, even if your niche is essentially steady all throughout the year, if there's not really any clear reason why it would be more popular during a certain part of the year than another part of the year, this can still apply to you. For example, let's see, computers or smartphones or pretty much any electronic for that matter. They're not really seasonal products. People still want and need a new computer or a new phone all throughout the year. But despite that fact, you're still going to have certain times of the year when sales will be heavier than others. Your holiday seasons, not just Christmas either, but other holidays throughout the year that result in people buying things for friends or significant others in their lives. All those types of things can increase traffic. They can also increase sales. And this can again end up skewing your stats a little bit if you don't really consider what you're looking at. A site about swimming pools, for example, would essentially end up being the opposite of my Down Comforter site. When people are hot, they'd be searching for swimming pool stuff. When they get cold, they'll be searching for Down Comforter stuff. So looking at a swimming pool website, let's say you finished your overhaul in September. You couldn't go and then look at your stats from October or November and accurately compare that to your stats from, say, June or July or August, because you would likely end up seeing that your site did better before your overhaul than after, but not because your overhaul work wasn't successful, but because of those seasonal tendencies and the changes in the market that come as a result of it. So make sure you're not running into a situation like this, whether you're looking at your Amazon stats or your Google stats. Now, if you're simply not sure of whether or not the time period of stats that you're looking at might be able to be compared with another time period of stats that you're looking at, whenever you're in doubt, I recommend to compare your revenue with the exact same month, but just from the previous year. So ultimately, you really won't know for sure how your overhaul work has affected a website until ultimately a year afterwards. And even then, it's really a year after Google has reflected all of your changes, because then that would start a time period of a year for you to build up all of those stats that you could then compare to an entire year before the overhaul was done. Ultimately, that's going to be your most accurate view of how it is done, looking at either Amazon or Google stats again. Now, if you dive a little deeper into your Amazon stats and start looking not just on a website by website basis, but looking down to the product level, you can try to figure out whether or not changes that you have made with your Amazon ads have been successful or not, in terms of maybe you change the design of your ads, or maybe you change the placement, or maybe you have just changed what products you promote on your website. And you want to see if these changes that you have made are more effective than what you were doing before. Beyond just general sales numbers, I like to look at two different aspects of my product stats. One is the CTR, which is your click-through rate or click-through ratio, and then you also have your conversion rate. Now with the CTR, you don't really get this stat from Amazon, but if you take stats from Amazon and from Google Analytics, you can calculate the click-through ratio of any of your product ads. What you want to do is get the number of product ad clicks off of your Amazon affiliate account, and then you divide that number by the unique number of users that you have had viewing that particular page in the same time period. And finally, multiply that result by 100, and that will give you the percentage of your click-through ratio. This essentially means your click-through ratio, how many people have to visit your website to get one person to click on your Amazon ad. Now, to a certain extent, stats like CTR and conversion rates, they're also not clear-cut. You can't necessarily say, because I have a higher click-through ratio on one ad compared to another, you can't necessarily say that that ad with the higher CTR performs better, because you have to consider other stats along with it. You have to look at your CTR and your conversion rate, and ultimately the amount of earnings that you're receiving to ultimately get a full picture of how your ads are doing. For example, with click-through ratio, in general, a higher click-through ratio is certainly better because that means that more of your website visitors are clicking on your Amazon ad. However, there are definitely tactics that some affiliates use that could inflate your click-through ratio, and it may not necessarily be a beneficial thing. For example, I can drive a lot of traffic to an Amazon link by lying to people or misleading them. If I were to, let's say I took a WordPress website and I took on the menu, what if I changed my home link and made it an Amazon affiliate link? Sure, people would click on it. Sure, I might have a pretty high click-through ratio on something like that, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be converting that traffic into sales. When you blindside people with an Amazon link, you actually end up with a much lower conversion rate as a result. Whereas if I was heavily pre-selling a product and made it very, very obvious on my website that when someone clicks on this link or on this image of the product, that they're going to be going to the Amazon website to buy the product, sure, you're going to have less people that click on that ad, but the people that click on it are preconditioned for that sale. They're a lot more likely to end up buying. And so you could have a really high CTR with a really low conversion rate, or you could have the opposite. You could have a really low CTR with a really high conversion. It doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other one either. So you have to consider it all together. You have to think about the tactics that you are using. And ultimately, if you're not sure if something is doing better or not, then just look at the earnings for it. See if that page per person that visits it makes more in Amazon earnings than before your overhaul work. That's ultimately going to be the best gauge in terms of whether your Amazon ad changes that you've done on your site have been effective or not, whether you are able to increase your earnings per visitor that goes to your site. That's going to be one of the best factors to look at. Now with your conversion rate, which I've been talking about already here, this is telling you how many people you have to send to the Amazon product page in order to get one sale. So if we have a conversion rate of, say, 2% on a product, then 2% of the traffic, or 1 out of every 50 people that we send to the page, will end up converting into a sale. Amazon will give you a conversion rate on your products. However, sometimes you might be promoting multiple variations of the same product on a single page, or you may even have 2 sets of stats that ultimately end up showing up. Here's just a quick example of that. Here is 2 pins-on comforters. They're the same thing. I've sold one here, but then I've also sold one here. They're not combined because the person that bought this one didn't directly travel through this link to get to it. But I still might want to consider whether or not to include that as part of my stats. And so sometimes you might need to calculate these things manually instead of just trusting the conversion rate that Amazon actually provides you with. If you take the number of sales that you've had on a product, divide it by the number of product link clicks, and then multiply that by 100, you'll get your conversion rate. And then if you take the number 100 and you divide it by your conversion rate percentage that you got from that previous calculation, you'll get the number of people that it takes to get one sale in terms of how many people have to click on your link to refer one sale. Now, just like your click-through ratio, your conversion rate can also vary quite a bit depending on the exact strategies that you are using. So make sure you are considering all that stuff together and other stats before you come to some kind of a conclusion about whether or not your overhaul work has helped or harmed each individual product that you are promoting. Now, very similar to what you did with your original overhaul research, you also want to revisit the Amazon website every couple of months or so to make sure that there are not new and or replacement products being released in your niche. You can also be looking out for things like things that are popular products, hot sellers. So I like to check out various bestseller lists that are on Amazon and also take a look at the individual product pages that I promote. For example here, if I go and search down comforter and find one of the products that I'm currently promoting, I believe I'm promoting this one here. By simply viewing through some of these areas, like customers who bought this item also bought, or sometimes they'll show you a section of people that viewed this item, also viewed. Here we go, this one, customers who viewed this item, also viewed these items. Sometimes these can lead you to find things that you've simply not noticed before. And a lot of these can be new products potentially that have been added on. I also like to go to the bestseller listings on Amazon. Not just the best sellers, but also your hot new releases, your most wished for types of products. A lot of times you can find newer releases within these areas. Even since I did my overhaul work, there has actually been a new release of a different kind of pins-on down comforter. Here it is, it's this one. They actually put up a really affordable down alternative comforter. It's a year-round one, so something that's really lightweight, meant to be even be used in the middle of the summer. Compared with the prices of other pins-on comforters that I currently promote on my site, this $49 is quite a deal. This one, for example, is close to $300. And the other one that I'm promoting, I believe, is this one, so it's right around $110. So obviously, having something really cheap like this, $49 product that I could promote alongside of my other ones on my existing pins-on page, something like this would be a really good idea to go and add into it. And again, this is something that I've just noticed since I did my research, which was no more than just a couple of months ago at this point. So new stuff certainly does come along on Amazon and can certainly be worth your time to look out for and to pay attention to. And to go in to add that new pins-on comforter into my website would really not take that much work. I would just have to set up an Amazon ad for it, maybe type out a paragraph or two worth of information about it and plop it in my page. Then I can potentially not only pick up search engine traffic for it, but also help to convert traffic on my pins on page even better. For those that are simply put away by the $200 or $300 down comforters, giving them this $49 option instead could be a really good idea. I mentioned earlier in tonight's class about my IKEA page and the simple fact that the IKEA comforters on Amazon are more expensive than they are from IKEA itself. And ultimately, there's no way around that problem. And I don't know if that's ever going to change. IKEA sells through a catalog. It looks like some people have maybe purchased some of those down comforters from their catalog or from their website, and then they just go and relist them on Amazon for a higher price. And sure, they do sell, but there's a pretty good chance that they sell at a much lower conversion rate than they would if they were reasonably priced on there. So I could, in the future, consider trying to lead people from a product that they're looking for, like an IKEA down comforter, and try to get them to buy something else fairly comparable instead. That new pins-on down comforter that's only $49 might actually be a really, really good option to try to promote to them as a replacement. I believe it could be potentially higher quality than what IKEA offers for even a lower price than a lot of the IKEA comforters are sold for. So you don't necessarily always have to give people what they want. You can say, hey, I know you're looking for this, but there might be something better that I could suggest to you to go and take a look at. And sometimes, you know, you might not change everybody's mind, but you can certainly change the mind of enough people to make sales, especially if you feel like the alternative, what you're trying to switch them to, will give you much better conversion rates as a result. That's when doing something a little unconventional like that may be worthwhile to at least try and to see if it will work out for the exact products that your situation is involving. Now, as far as your actual expansion maintenance goes, as you are monitoring both Google and Amazon to find out whether or not your overhaul was successful, you can end up running into situations where you simply need to make additional changes or additions to your website. If you don't find that a product is converting very well, you might need to make some adjustments to your ad. If you find that your search rankings aren't quite good enough on a particular phrase that you really want to be in the top 10 for, you may still need to add a little more content. If your search ranking listings are not getting a lot of clicks, even though they're in a really great placement, you might just need to make some kind of minor content edit where you're just targeting that sentence or two that shows up in your search engine listing. In most cases, though, these additional maintenance items on your website should mostly be pretty minor. If you're looking at the need for really major additions to your site, simply consider whether it's going to be worthwhile to do so or not. Very similar to what you were doing initially with your overhaul research, you still kind of want to be doing the same thing here in terms of deciding how you should be expanding your website, what areas to expand into, how much work is going to go into it, and what's your potential payoff for that work. If you're just trying to increase a search ranking on a page, let's say maybe you're on page 2 and you want to be up on page 1, but if there's only 100 people a month that are searching for that phrase, you know, it might not be worth adding a whole bunch of new content to your site to try to get it. So you do want to look at each individual case and consider everything that is involved before you actually decide to make changes or not. Sometimes it's simply better just left as it is. Your time may be able to be better spent building new websites or overhauling additional websites. Now, with a successful overhaul, you're still going to want to continue to monitor your site every couple of months to make sure it is still performing at least the same or potentially even better than before. But after a couple of years, like I mentioned earlier in this class, it's entirely possible to see some kind of a drop in traffic and or sales because your niche is simply changing. And when this happens, definitely do not get discouraged if you end up needing to do some kind of a minor overhaul to your Amazon sites every couple of years or so to just keep them up to date. This is a natural part of the life cycle of any content website that is not being constantly updated. So if you want to be able to just build these websites and forget about them, you can certainly do that, but there is typically kind of an upper limit to how long you can just leave them sitting there for, at least if you want them to always be performing at the same level. If you're completely content with, after a couple of years, with losing 10-20% of the revenue off of that website, and you don't want to have to make changes to it, that's certainly something that you can consider. But there's other people that they'll see that 10 or 20% drop and they want to get that recovered. And so in those cases, you would certainly want to be monitoring your sites long term and be willing to go and make some minor additions or even mini overhauls to your site every few years or so. Now, if you find out that your overhaul was not successful, and or if your site is simply not performing as good as you want it to, that's when you're most likely going to need to make some additional changes after your overhaul. But again, make sure you know for sure that Google has really reflected the changes that you have made on your website. Now, in terms of the actual edits or additions that you might want to make to your site, I'm not going to be going into detail on these today because this is done in the same exact manner that we did our overhaul work over the past couple of classes, where we were editing and adding to existing pages and even creating brand new pages to put on our site. However, I do have some specific recommendations for you for a number of different types of these maintenance changes that I want to talk to you about. The first one is content editing and additions. If you have a website that has good search rankings, but certain phrases have really low click-through ratios, do like I showed you before, search that keyword on Google, find your listing, and then try to make some minor changes to the text that Google shows in that listing. Find that text on your site, and that's where you want to make those changes to. Again, this should be a minor change, not a drastic one, and give it a little bit of time to get reflected in the Google listing and see how it affects your click-through ratio. Now, if you have waited long enough for your rankings to update after your overhaul work, but you still are not on page number 1 for certain keywords that you're going after, you could consider adding even more content to those pages to boost those rankings. For example, if I have a page that's stuck on page number 2 of Google, and it only has maybe 500 or 600 words worth of content on it or something, I'll easily go and put another 400 or 500 words on that page to try to boost its ranking up. It's pretty feasible to be able to move up a page in Google by increasing your content by 50 to 100% or so. Now, it's not necessarily always going to be the case. There are certainly some keyword phrases that it takes a little more to break into page 1 on. But if you have 20 pages and they're all stuck on page number 2 of Google, and you double the content on all 20 of those pages, probably half or more of them will end up on page 1 afterwards. So in my opinion, that's a pretty safe bet to try to go for, and is often worth that additional content. Now with your advertisements, you may find that you have changes that you want to make to your products that you're promoting and or to the actual advertisements that you use to promote those products. If you have a product ad that is failing to convert traffic into sales on your site, before you actually change it, first make sure that you have actually given that ad enough traffic to convert a single sale. If you're not pre-selling on your website, then it can easily take a couple hundred of clicks on an ad to get a single sale. However, if you're heavily pre-selling, then it may only take 30 or 40 clicks on an ad to get a sale. It can just really vary quite a bit depending on what exact tactics you are using. It can also depend on things such as the price of the product. Higher priced products end up having lower conversion rates naturally. The only time though that I would really recommend to make some kind of an immediate change to a product ad on your site after an overhaul is if it's simply impossible for a sale to be completed on that Amazon product. If the product gets discontinued, or if it goes out of stock and it doesn't look like it's ever going to come back in stock, if it's been replaced by another product, if something else has simply happened to where the chances of a sale on that product are very, very slim. Could even be something like my IKEA situation where people can just simply go elsewhere and get that product for cheaper. These would really be the only situations where I would say it's okay to make some kind of a drastic quick change to your site. Otherwise, you do want to give your ads plenty of time to get enough clicks on them, at least a few hundred clicks per link, to actually determine whether or not that product's going to sell for you. Now with new topic expansion, if you can find proof of a new keyword phrase and or a popular product or a new product in your niche, it's certainly okay to go in and to make a quick expansion to your website to add in new content or to add in new pages to target those relevant products and or keywords. This can definitely help to keep a site at its maximum profitability. However, it is not entirely necessary. And if you're running a lot of different Amazon sites like I do, you can honestly end up spending too much time doing this kind of stuff. And it just may be a little too overwhelming to try to keep track of all of your niches and all of your products constantly. So you may just have to revisit them less often as you grow into running more websites. But when you're only running 1 or 2 websites, you have an abundance of time typically to be able to focus on sites and to maximize their profitability. So just kind of depending on what your situation is and what your goals may be with your sites, you can decide whether or not to follow up with this new topic expansion in the future if you do find proof of new products or new keywords coming into existence. When you expand your site with new page topics, this can actually be used as a strategy to help you increase your search rankings. Not on necessarily the new pages that you're creating though, but for existing pages that are on your website. This is done by linking those new pages up with those existing pages that you're wanting to improve your rankings on. So let's say I have maybe my Down Comforter brands page. Let's say there's really good traffic on that keyword phrase, and my ranking's not quite where I want it to be. Maybe I'm down on page 2 or maybe down on page 3 even. If I felt like it would really be worth the effort to try to bump that page up, and if I've expanded that actual page quite a bit already and it doesn't seem to be making a major difference, then building up a little subsection of your website where all those new pages just link back to that one page that you're trying to boost up, and you make all of these subpages about individual subtopics that relate to that main topic. Things like this can be used, especially on higher traffic, higher competition keyword phrases, to try to boost up your search rankings more. But again, this kind of thing can certainly take a lot of work and a lot of effort, and so you don't want to just blindly go after these types of things. You want to only be doing this when you have a very clear reason to do so, where you have keyword data and keyword traffic, and maybe even some kind of a proof that you're part of the way there already. By being able to find your page within, say, the top 10 pages of Google on a keyword phrase that you're really trying to go after, you at least have some kind of a proof that you're on the right track. And it might just be an indication that you simply need more to add on to it. Another part of it can be time too. I have had a website that I build, and I've had it just sit there and do nothing before. And then all of a sudden, 6 months or a year down the road, it comes to life and it starts getting bombarded with traffic and has really great search rankings and things of that nature. Sometimes when you're building really high quality websites, if you didn't necessarily do the best with your content in terms of going after keyword phrases, or maybe you went after keyword phrases that were too high of competition, sometimes it simply takes time to pass for your rankings to work their way high enough. You can have other websites that find your high quality content and they link up to you. In fact, I'm pretty sure I've been able to find Down Comforter Guide is linked up to by a couple of other comforter or bedding related websites just for one of the informational pages that I have on there. Things like that can do wonders for your search rankings, but you don't want to force them. You want that stuff to happen naturally, and unfortunately it can take time for those things to get reflected in the search rankings. The moral of the story, though, is simply to think twice before you pile a ton of work and a ton of effort into making changes or doing some kind of an expansion with your after overhaul work. Simply make sure that it's going to be worth your efforts to go after it. Doing a whole section or a subsection of new page topics to boost up the rankings of a specific page on your site, I really wouldn't recommend doing stuff like that unless that keyword you're going for potentially has thousands of monthly searches at a minimum, and maybe even more than that. Now, one of the last things I want to mention here is about sites that have failed to become successful after a major overhaul. Even following my strategies and advice, this is still entirely possible simply because I can't control what niche you're promoting. I can't control the keywords that you select, the products you promote, the content that you put on your website. Ultimately, all that stuff is out of my control. I can make recommendations as far as what kinds of things you should be targeting with all that, but ultimately, those things are still kind of up to you to decide, and to a certain extent may even be decided for you by the niche that you select to target. Certain niches, you may only have a limited selection of keywords, and you may not have control over the competition of those things. And, unless you figure out that information before you build your site, sometimes you just never really know whether it's even possible to build one of these smaller niche websites and to have it really dominate in the search rankings for a certain industry or not. With that said, though, if you have not had a successful overhaul for any reason, I strongly recommend for you to take a little bit of time to try to figure out why. Ask yourself if any of these things might apply to your website in its current state. Number one, is your niche too broad? Does your niche simply comprise of too many different subjects, and does your site ultimately only cover a small fraction of those topics? If so, you're likely targeting a niche that is way too broad. You also only need to find a tiny little piece of that niche to go after and make your entire website about that instead. I've talked about niches and talked about targeting before. Just as a quick example here, a super broad and general niche would be something like cars. You don't ever want to create an Amazon affiliate website about just cars in general. By narrowing down that niche even more, let's say you narrow into a specific type of car, maybe a Ford Mustang. Even that narrowed down niche may still be too broad, just depending on how many websites out there might be trying to target it, how much content might be on the internet about that niche, and ultimately how many different subtopics are there relating to that niche. So then you can still dive yet deeper into the Ford Mustang niche, and you could go after a very specific aspect of it. You may even try to target a specific year or a range of years. Let's say you really liked the Ford Mustang Cobras, or maybe the old body style 5.0s, or maybe you liked the old muscle car types of ones. You could then even drill into those deeper and just target one aspect of it. Talk about the engines, talk about redoing the body, whatever the case may be. You can simply see how any one of these potential super defined topics would be a lot easier to build a website centered around it, to cover a large chunk of the possible topics that are within it, and to ultimately be able to get some good search rankings for it, because your site could then be viewed as an authority on that topic. When you're dealing with those really broad niches though, cars for example, you would need potentially millions of pages of content on your website to be able to get a good ranking on a super broad niche like that. And for an individual person building an Amazon affiliate website, that's just not practical. Now, number two is, do your keywords have too much competition? No matter how much high quality content you put on your site, do you not seem to be able to get anywhere with improving your search rankings? Is it possible that your keyword phrases may simply have too much competition on them? Sometimes your rankings can, again, slowly improve with these types of phrases over time as other sites link to your content and even as your domain name grows older. However, there are other times you may simply be better off trying to figure out how you can target your content better to more specific keywords that have less competition. Just like I talked about with your niche and how it can be too broad and how to narrow it down into a much more specific topic, you can do the same with pretty much any keyword phrase that you're targeting or any page of content that you have on your website. If you had a page of content about cars, instead of talking about everything, make it a very, very specific topic. You can do this not just on a website basis, but on a page-by-page basis too. And so if you feel like your individual pages are not able to achieve the rankings that you're going for, consider whether this could be why, simply because those pages are too broad and the keywords that they're targeting might be too broad and therefore have too much competition on them. The number 3 is your content not unique and or low quality? Ultimately, if you are taking shortcuts with your website content, you really shouldn't expect too much out of the website. Ask yourself if it is worth recreating that site or not with unique content, or if you would simply be better off starting a brand new website. Just make sure if you do start a new site that you take the unique content route with it. Content and the quality of it will have a drastic long-term effect on the success of your Amazon affiliate site. Even if you find a way to put up a completely automated website and have it succeed now, it will not last because Amazon doesn't want affiliates that aren't putting effort into it, and ultimately Google doesn't want listings in their rankings for automated content like that. They are both looking for you to put a little bit of skin in the game and to make something valuable for both searchers and also for potential Amazon customers as too. So you need to make sure you're hitting this from both ends, and unfortunately it's just not really something that's negotiable going into the future if you want to be able to get free traffic off of search engines. If you're willing to pay for traffic, by all means, automate it. It doesn't matter because you don't rely on, Google to be giving you those people. However, I hate putting paid advertising into an Amazon affiliate website, especially trying to refer direct sales. It's almost impossible to make a profit off of it, honestly. Unless you're dealing with really expensive products that can convert extremely well, and you have a very, very targeted source of people to advertise to. It's really one of the few ways that even works out profitably and reliably, I believe, is more important. Because if you're pouring money into advertising all the time, you don't want it to just work some of the time. You need that to be working all the time to be able to consistently make a profit on it. So I prefer the free traffic route. Free traffic's always going to be there and will always be available as long as you set up everything to work correctly with that. Number 4 is, are your products simply not good sellers on Amazon? Even though Amazon is a major e-commerce powerhouse, number 1 in the world, in fact, not everything sells great on Amazon, and sometimes Amazon does not even have the best price. If everything looks right with your website and you're sending traffic to Amazon and you're still not getting any sales, do some research to find out if the product could be the problem. Do people actually buy that kind of product online? Can you find the product for a cheaper price elsewhere online? I mentioned this with my IKEA website a little earlier. The IKEA comforters are simply cheaper on the IKEA website than they are on Amazon, and there doesn't look to be any possible way around that. So it's something I'm always going to have to consider with that page, and could very well affect how or what I decide to do with that particular page in the future. Can you easily find a product that you promote in a local retail store, especially if you live in the US? I know there are certainly differences in retail stores depending on where you live, but if you're going to a major international brick and mortar retailer, like let's say you go to a Walmart and you try to find a product, chances are if it's in your Walmart, it's probably going to be in another Walmart on the other side of the country. There's no guarantee that the prices are going to be exactly the same, but you can still use it as a general gauge, or just to simply find if it's there or not. Sometimes if you can find the product in a local retail store, you'll buy it there instead of buying it online, simply for the sake of convenience. It just kind of depends on what it is, how quickly you need it, and how the prices compare. And that brings me to my next point. If you can find a product in a local retail store, how does the store price compare to the online price? I have been in a local retail store, especially having kids and buying birthday or Christmas presents for them. I've been looking at a product in a retail store before and was just about to buy it, and I'll go and double check on Amazon real quick to see what it sells for there. And if it's drastically cheaper, unless I just need to be buying it and have it in my hand that particular day, I often will opt to buy it online instead. So these types of things can be major drivers of both traffic and potentially Amazon sales, and it simply leads some products to be better sellers than others. And so, you know, if you feel like you've really done a great job and everything is looking like it should be working right on your website, and you're just missing this one final aspect of converting that traffic into sales, you know, look at the products, see if you can find any kind of an indication there as to why this is actually happening this way. The answers to these questions can end up leading you directly to the source of the problem, and especially to help you to figure out whether or not you can fix it. If you can't fix it, you can always try to find different products to promote in your niche that do not suffer from the same issues. For example, let's say you're going after a really, really common type of product that is available in almost any local retail store that you could go to that has to do with that type of product. Let's say it's an electronics product or something, and you can find it in every local Walmart and Target and Best Buy and so on. You know, what can you actually do about that? How could you modify your website to compete with something that you know people are more inclined to just buy in a local retail store as opposed to buying online? You simply have to find a different way to approach it. Find something relating to that niche, to those types of products that they can't find. A lot of times, you can accomplish this by going into more upper end kind of products. You may only be able to find the cheaper stuff, the more general stuff that most people are interested in purchasing. That's often what is in the local retail stores. If you're wanting something for more of a professional use, or just simply want something of higher quality, there are often, these more higher end products that are similar, but they're just made better, made of higher quality stuff. They last longer, they have more features, so on and so forth. A lot of times, that more higher end kind of stuff may only be able to be found online. And so you can try to essentially lead traffic from those cheaper ideas that they're finding in the local stores to the more upper end stuff that they're only going to be able to get online. Just as one example of a way that you could potentially try to handle a problem like that. Ultimately, like I've mentioned before already, if you find yourself staring down too much work to try to fix your website, or if it simply becomes too much of a headache with no clear solution in sight, consider abandoning it completely. But don't do that if it has any kind of traffic on it. You're only wanting to completely abandon a site if it is just dead in the water and it stays that way for a prolonged period of time. Otherwise, you can still find some kind of a way to monetize the site, even if you just have to throw Google pay-per-click ads on it. Now finally, once you've reached this point, the Azon Overhaul series is now complete. I congratulate you on completing the Azon Overhaul series. I truly hope you have enjoyed this series and found it useful to help you with your Amazon affiliate websites. And even though I design my strategies for Amazon, you can honestly use my tactics for pretty much any other kind of website that you could think of. So I truly hope that you'll find that the strategies in this training will come back to help you again and again throughout the rest of your marketing career. The last thing that I want to mention, even though I may have mentioned this already once before, is to simply revisit your maintenance periodically. Once you complete your overhaul work, and even after you revisit the site to make sure it was successful, come back every couple of months, every 6 months, every year, whatever you have the time for. Monitor how it is doing and ask yourself if it needs another overhaul. Nearly all successful sites will end up eventually needing another overhaul if it is completely left alone to just sit there. And even if this does take years to happen, at some point it will need some kind of a refresher to keep it performing at the same level, most likely. Let's see, Tina is asking, I guess that's not quite a question yet. Yeah, sure, Tina. Feel free to ask your questions, even if it is about Weaver. Joan mentions my site has been hacked, but it's not very developed. So I want to delete everything on it. Can I do this? Yeah, you certainly can. In addition to deleting all the files from the public HTML directory. The other part of it would also be the database. Kind of depending on what exactly was done to the site, sometimes you can just delete all the files out of the public HTML directory and just reinstall WordPress and plugins or themes that you may be using from scratch after you've wiped out all those files. And then as long as you connect that new WordPress installation up with that original database that you had, then you may still even be able to maintain the existing work. However, it is sometimes possible for hackers to be able to add stuff into your database. But just from my experiences with WordPress getting hacked, I have not yet found a situation where they've done anything with the database. They seem to just be messing with the physical files, and ultimately they're adding new files to it so they can then do whatever it is they're looking to do with the site. Usually they're just trying to serve up some kind of spam ads. With a couple of my sites that recently got hacked, they actually used them as email spam servers. In all those cases, though, by simply wiping out all the files from the public HTML directory and redoing everything from scratch, it did wipe out everything that they had. I hope, Joan, in the next couple of weeks or so, not sure if you are part of Team Azon Pro off the top of my head or not. I have been intending on doing a hacking lesson, anti-hacking lesson, I guess I should say, for Team Azon Pro. And I hope to be getting that finished and published there in the next couple of weeks. It's something I was originally going to do a while back, and ultimately before I was about to publish it, I realized that it might be a little incomplete. I wanted to make sure that I had all the information you guys would really need, how to actually clean the sites yourself and stuff like that. But yeah, simply deleting the public HTML directory, reinstalling your software from scratch is one of the easiest ways that I have found that does seem to work for a large majority of WordPress hacking cases that I've come across. So it's at least worth a shot, in my opinion. If you don't care about any content that's there, then leaving that existing database and trying to reconnect it, that part's not necessary if you're not trying to retain any of your content. Let's see, Tina. Asking about Weaver Extreme. Oh no. You want to make a child theme. That is the one thing that probably about Weaver Extreme that I honestly don't know how to do. As far as what you're talking about with all the settings, saving all of your settings and even exporting those settings and trying to import them into another site, that does work if that's all you're trying to accomplish with it. I've always understood the child theme to work like if you want to essentially redesign the way the theme looks at the coding level, then you would do that with a child theme. But it's also a way for the theme to still be able to update to new versions as normal without wiping out those customizations that you have made. So essentially, when you're in Weaver, all those different sub-themes that they have laid out for you, you can kind of think of each of those as like their own child theme, except those are obviously ones that are built in to the site already. As far as if you're just selecting one of those and customizing the settings on it, saving the settings like you're talking about doing through the WordPress or through the Weaver theme, that certainly does work. So I'm not entirely sure if you would have the need to truly make a child theme or not. Tina, that's a good question about the hacking. With the public HTML folder, does it matter if there is more than one domain? Yes, it certainly does. If you are on a shared web hosting account and you go to the public HTML directory and you delete everything, you will delete every single website that you have on that entire shared hosting account. So when I talk about deleting the public HTML folder, I'm really just referring to deleting everything for that specific website. So if you're on a shared hosting account, you might have a public HTML folder, which then has one website located in that folder, but then you would also have a number of other folders in the public HTML folder, and each one of those might be for an individual website. So you might have public HTML as a folder, and then you might have another folder for downcomforterguide.com. And that folder would be essentially the public HTML folder for the Down Comforter Guide website. So that's really what you're looking for, is the base directory of the actual website that you're working on. You would not want to delete other folders that had to do with other websites. So if you were on a shared hosting account. Yes, thank you, Tina. That is very worthwhile to point out. Joan, I personally don't find it very hard to swap a theme on a website with a lot of content, especially the Weaver theme. I find the Weaver theme to be pretty flexible. There's a number of different sub-themes within the Weaver theme that you can select. And I use the sub-themes to get a general design for the site and also general placement as to where things will show up. And then I'll go into the settings for that sub-theme to fine-tune it to get it to look the way that I want it to. Ultimately, though, just simply installing the Weaver theme and activating it will, selecting a sub-theme and stuff will get it switched over pretty quickly, no matter how much content is actually found on it. Make sure, though, you get the theme extras plugin that it recommends for you to install. After you install Weaver Extreme, it'll recommend these couple of other plugins in a box at the top of the page. I recommend the theme extras plugin to go along with it. Let's see, Tina is asking, how would I recommend setting up a menu system on an authority site that has pages and posts? What I recommend to do is to keep it pretty basic, kind of like I've done with my sites. On On Down Comforter Guide, for example, I have my home page, and then I have the main sections of my website linked up from my menu. I typically do not ever add submenus into that menu system to link up to all the individual pages or posts that might be under each of those categories. I find that to be a little overkill in terms of linking. Unfortunately, you can't really control the links that great in WordPress, and so then if you set up a menu on the top of your site that links up to, an extensive number of posts and pages through, a bunch of submenus and stuff like that, you're linking to all of those pages that are in your menu system from every single page of your WordPress site that includes that menu on it. So you end up diluting your structure too much that way. Ideally, I'd actually like to be able to go in on a page-by-page basis and specifically exclude some of those menu links from being indexed to get the best possible SEO benefit of setting up a website structure. Unfortunately, that's not easy to do in WordPress. I have been considering putting together a plugin that might accomplish something like that in the future, though. It's not entirely necessary. I don't do that on my sites currently, but what I know about website structure and linking strategies, I do believe something like that could be beneficial. As far as what you guys should be worrying about doing, and this is even, what I do on my current websites. Just a basic menu system. Look at the home page of your site, ask what comes next. If you're writing out, say, a big web that's going to show, going deeper into your website content. You start with your home page at the top. Next, you have your 3 category pages, and then everything below that would be your sub pages that link up to your category pages. So I try to have the home page and the main category pages linked up from my menu. If you find that your menu's too cluttered, let's say you have a bunch of pages that you want to link up, or maybe the text that is going to be linked up from each of these menu items, if it's just too long and it pushes out past one row, it can end up looking pretty bad, pretty cluttered. If that's the case, consider whether there's any way you can combine some of those sections of your site, and in a worst case scenario, just see if you can shorten the words. If I needed to, I could drop pretty much all of these down into a one-word statement. I could just call this one brands. I could call this one guide. I could call this one concerns. I could call this one about. So if need be, you can always shorten the text that's being used. Okay, I pulled up your live website on another screen of mine here, Tina. I don't want to show this publicly, but I do see what you're talking about. It looks like you're using submenus, essentially. I think what you're doing is okay. I wouldn't necessarily worry about the submenu parts of it though. So just have your main links going across the top of the site, but don't worry about additional links in, pull down menus for those. What you would then want to do instead is on each of the pages you're linking to here, when somebody lands on that page, you just want to make sure that it's pretty easy, especially in the top chunk of the page, to be able to navigate to some of those other sections. It looks like in your second menu item, for example, it looks like you have your main topic, and then you have a number of subtopics, and then within each of those subtopics, you would have kind of like a table of contents or something. Just something like that will make it to where your menu isn't very cluttered, but people would still be able to navigate through all of your content easily, and it'll help a search engine to be able to find all of that content easily without diluting the structure of your site. So essentially, the way you currently have it set up, basically all pages of your site are going to link to all other pages of your site, and you would end up with a completely flat website structure. There would really be no point in organizing any content across the entire website, doing it in that manner. So at least in terms of SEO. So I like to try to find some kind of a balance between what's best for SEO and what's going to be best for my website visitors. I don't want to degrade the quality for my website visitors to cater to SEO too much, and vice versa. I don't want to cater to SEO too much to where I'm harming my website visitors. So sometimes you may not be able to do the best possible thing for SEO and for your visitors, but I try to pick something in the middle if I'm ever faced with a situation like that. Let's see, Joan, you're asking, can we ask more questions from my overhaul site later? I do welcome questions through my customer support system. They do not go directly to me. However, I have knowledgeable people that are answering your questions for you in customer support, and if for some, they're all actually customers of mine is where I hire from within. So it's people that know my products, people that build their own Amazon websites. And so they'll be able to answer your questions in most cases. If they don't know an answer to a question, or it has something specific to do with my recommendations on what they should be doing as part of one of my training series or something like that, they just come to me and ask, and I'll often relay an answer through them or something. So you won't necessarily reach me directly by going through my customer support, but you can certainly still ask questions there and get help that way. Your other question, Joan, you want to redirect one site from its existing domain name to another domain. Is it easy to do this? Yes, you should be able to do that within pretty much any hosting account, definitely within a HostGator account. On your cPanel page, let me look at this real quick to tell you the exact wording of the link. I want to say it's domain forwarding or something along those lines. Okay, no, it's called redirects under domains. Right here, redirects. You just want to do a permanent 301 redirect. If for some reason, let's say you had started to build a website under a domain name, and you switched domain names, and you wanted any existing rankings or links or whatever from that old website to still point to your new website. You just set up a redirect from your old domain name, redirect to it to your new domain name, and that's how it's done correctly, at least. And that will forward not just traffic, but it could also transfer search rankings, and anyone that clicks on a link that somebody may have made to that old website, it'll forward them along to the new one. With an Amazon review, if I'm seeing like something like what you're seeing, where 67% you say have reviewed it 5-star, but 15% have reviewed it negative at 1 star, I would still certainly promote that product. I might look at some of those negative reviews though and find what it is that they don't like. Was it not what they were expecting? Is it just not right for certain situations and stuff like that? And so you can actually go ahead and address a lot of those negative review concerns on your own website before you even send traffic over to Amazon. So you can try to exclude a lot of that 15% from even clicking on your Amazon ad by just saying, this isn't going to be right for you. And then you not only would try to address the issues in your own webpage. So then you're pre-selling. You would get even better conversion rates by doing something like that. And people look at your website positively that way too. They're like, wow, these guys are actually giving me information to help me. They don't want to just make a sale. They want me to, actually solve my problem. And they don't want me to buy this because this isn't going to be right for me. And people like that kind of stuff. It means a lot to them because it's rare in the marketing world for somebody to just blatantly say, don't buy that. It's not right for you. A lot of people will just say, yeah, buy it. It's great for you, and will just accept the refunds that come in later for the people that it's not actually right for. I prefer not to go that way, and it does seem to be beneficial overall, helping to build that level of trust with your site. Thank you, Joan. I appreciate all of your comments. I'm glad you have found the training to be useful. Yeah, thank you for your sorries for my hacking experiences too. Sorry you seem to be going through some of the same issues, but yeah, I make lemonades out of my lemons, and if I have an issue, I'll try to learn something from it, and if I can, help teach others about it so maybe they can avoid the same problem in the future.